And next we have steps of development. And the steps of development are, I think it was 8, because I've organized a lot of my concepts into numbers, and I noticed that I didn't have any concept that corresponded to the number 8, so I decided to try and see if I could fit with 8 steps. So that's the first thing that I remember, that it was 8 steps. And the first step was self-questioning, or perhaps questioning in general. This first insight or realization that you need development, and that comes from a sense of being a bit lost or confused, and having a kind of seriousness regarding what is essential in life. And I refer to that as questioning and self-questioning. And the second step is finding the right guidance, I think it was called, which involves finding the answers, to see if someone else out there has figured it out before, or if there are some answers in religions or in philosophy, or perhaps even in science, whatever people gravitate towards. But they need to use discernment in order to not get lost among all the philosophies and worldviews and whatever else they are like searching through. And because I think there is a limit to how much a person can figure things out in isolation. There are certain things one can discover on one's own, and I think there are certain things one has to discover on one's own. But there are all of these thinkers who have been thinking about existence and the meaning of life before, so it is quite natural that people would want to look through some of that stuff. So finding the right guidance, that is like the second step. And then the third step is, I think I called it theory and philosophy. But basically it's not really, it's more like having a grasp of the essential the fundamental basis of the theory of development, or this idea that you need self-knowledge and timeless principles. I think I made a slight modification to that step in the way I describe it, in order to distinguish it from step 5, which is more purely or more precisely the theory and philosophy, the study of the laws of the universe, or whatever I refer to it as. So step 3 is like this preliminary focus or knowledge that kind of works as a basis before one goes into the other stuff. And I guess I'm not sure what I wrote about that in my sort of updated version. I'm thinking mostly of the old stuff. It is often easier for me to remember old things rather than more recent updates, with some exceptions. Sometimes I do, because I'm thinking about improving things all the time. So of course certain things I remember better when I have because I remember what needs to be sort of updated. But with that, it was such a minor thing that I didn't really I can't recall it at the moment. But then we continue on with the fourth step, which is, well, we sort of go through the levels of the human being, of fundamental psychology, which means that we start at consciousness. And so you practice self-consciousness. I think I was was it practice of self-consciousness? I think it was something like that. Basically, you practice becoming more aware of yourself and how your mind works and what you tend to get hung up on, and you try to remember your life. It can be a good exercise to try to write a bit of a biography to see how you ended up where you are right now, and if you can notice certain patterns that keep repeating and things like that. And then of course also perhaps you can try recording yourself to get an idea of how other people might view you and things like that. And all of this is meant to facilitate more of a realistic grasp of yourself, which can lead to more humility. I guess it can also be a bit painful sometimes, but and also things that you tend to like forget about yourself. Not just like how you come across, but also how you work, how you function as a kind of complex system with these layers. So the fourth step like follows from the basic foundation of development, which is you need to know what it is you're supposed to develop, which is of course yourself. But you don't even know. You need to know exactly what you are sort of dealing with, and understand that you very often people are trying to like change and improve themselves without really knowing what it is they are trying to change or improve, without truly knowing what it is they want, and also this I guess perhaps lack of awareness of how they are actually rejecting themselves and why they are rejecting themselves. But anyway, yeah, there's a lot to talk about each of these steps, and I made an entire series about these steps. But I'm just trying to remember exactly like how I divided these steps and their basic aim. And the fifth aim then it deals with the intellect, which comes after the level of consciousness. And the intellect has to do with study, with what might be good to know, to keep your knowledge and understanding in the right channels, so that we don't go off track too much or mix things, ideas and worldviews that are actually contradictory or incompatible, so that we encounter objections and then we don't know how to answer them because we haven't really thought things through accurately. But basically this is assuming there is some kind of education. I'm also thinking a little bit of like if one is to make some kind of education or offer something like that, then there needs to be some kind of contents that are to be studied in some sense. So it's like the closest thing to what we basically think of when we think of education, basically the study of certain subjects. So that relates to the intellect and essential subjects, not just anything, not just accumulation of knowledge without discernment, like or what is good for the economy or how to get a good profession. It's not that kind of education, but about what is like essential in order to create a more functional way of life for ourselves and perhaps also for society. And then the sixth step is working with emotions and also our basic life force. So that has to do with developing will and authenticity. And developing will also is related to kindness. So basically it's like control of emotions and detaching from identifications and practicing being authentic and try to discover what gives us a sense of substance, how to express ourselves, and to practice to stand up for ourselves. Very often it's very easy for people to submit to a kind of social shame. So for example, today a lot of people are using like autism as a slur. It's like you're such an autist, or you're being autistic, or but at the same time autism is like a real condition. So it's like, so what if you are autistic, or so what if someone is autistic? I mean, if that's what they are, then that's what they are. Like there seems to be an implicit assumption that if you try to use slurs against someone, that will somehow motivate them to change. But if that is their nature, if that is like some kind of psychological impairment that is pretty real, then how do you actually expect them to change? There is an element of manipulation involved in that, where people are, I guess, counting on this idea that people will feel this sense of shame about being called out for being something that people might ridicule. But then what you should try to do is to stand up for it. Just test that and try it out and see how it feels. Like, well, like, is that a problem for you? Like, if I'm autistic, like, would that be a problem for you? Like, try to, because people do not often expect that. They expect you to sort of fall under this shame, this social shame, which they are often attempting. So you have to understand that how people perceive you and how people are like annoyed with you is their problem. Now there are of course certain instances where there can be a legitimate use for social shaming. Like if someone, I mentioned before that if someone is out throwing batteries in nature, or just acting very irresponsibly in a way that doesn't really have anything to do with your nature, because batteries and all of this stuff is like a contrivance, things that have been invented, and so these are things that we should be able to handle in a more sensible way. And if someone is not doing that, then there could be a use for social shaming. But when it comes to your nature and things like people shaming you because you are too skinny, for example, even though that's just your genetics, or someone is shaming you. I mean, some people have complained about my voice, like, or made fun of my voice, like, or my dialect and things like that. And I mean, I don't know how. I'm not sure exactly how these people are thinking, but it's like, I don't really care that much. I mean, I do. I mean, I know what my shortcomings are, but ultimately, if someone has a problem with it, it's their problem and it's not mine, because there's a limit to what I can change. And I guess I mean, there are certain types that will have an easier time with different steps, and those types who are more like a bit rebellious and have more of this energy of excidium within themselves will be more resistant to social shaming. They will not care as much. And that will, but there are other types that might need to really struggle a bit more and really sort of try to find the courage to stand up for who they are. And if someone says that, or trying to use some kind of manipulative tactic, and the person knows that this is a serious thing for them, like if it is something that you may not like that thing about yourself, but you also know that it's not really something you can get away from. Like you have to use the cards that you are dealt with, so to speak. And then you say, well, those were the cards you were given, so it's better to just stand up for it. It will feel better and a bit empowering if you actually stand up for these things that other people may want to make fun of, so to speak, and then see how they react and test them on that. But it requires a bit of a backbone, perhaps, in some cases for some people. But I think that is something we need to involve in a kind of process of development. And then, so that has to do with authenticity and standing up for your nature. And also sometimes also to stand up for your desires. But we need to distinguish between desires that are reasonable and that seems to be there in your nature for a reason. And thus I don't count it as ego. Because ego I see as something that is, like I've said before, something more dysfunctional and false. Like something that, like your ego is that which almost wants to submit to social shame. Like you've been given this nature, and perhaps you don't have a good voice, and perhaps you don't have the best genetics. And perhaps you have some kind of mental impairment or something that makes you appear a bit funny or weird to people. And that part which thinks you should feel shame for this, that is like the ego. It's that you need to get rid of. And not just about anything that has manifestation and desire or drive necessarily. So just want to point that out. So that's step 6. And then we come to step 7, which is increase awareness, I think it was called. And it's where you really start to feel this transformation and get into this transformation where you start to feel that you are becoming more different, and all these things that you may have taken seriously before, or perhaps this social shame which tended to get to you more, you can start to feel that you can actually, that there are more possibilities than you thought, in that you can choose to stand up for yourself in a way that you didn't think of before, because you didn't understand certain things and you had not practiced doing certain things. And this is it is this step where I tend to like analyze like certain aspects of religion and try to compare a bit, like the revelations in Christianity, for example. It's like a symbolic language for the inner transformation that occurs when you are reaching this kind of enlightenment or divinity state, or what is it called in Christianity? It's like salvation or something, because it's like the real you is saved from all the falseness of who you might think you are, or being capitulating to like the culture, which is like the beast, this thing that the spirit of imperialism and oppression. And so step 7 is like, is there something that I am forgetting about step 7, something more specific? I mean, it's like when you're like really embodying this idea of this like formula, like you understand this idea of interconnection, and I guess it has more to do with timeless principles. It moves more in that direction than self-knowledge, which we have sort of covered. So now I guess we move into expanding things a bit more. And so we begin with ourselves, and then we expand to try to work on this kind of interaction that we have with others. And then we also start to consider how to transmit and keep this knowledge alive in the culture, so that people don't forget this and start to have other strange ideas that creates more difficulties in the world rather than awareness. So it's like, it's an increase in your attention, not just like studying yourself and not just studying the world and not just trying to help others, but doing everything all at the same time. So it's like you add more dimensions to your concerns, so to speak. So while we begin by being concerned about how we are going to get out of this kind of confusion that we find ourselves at the start of self-questioning, and then we start to discover more, and we discover more about ourselves and about what's essential, and then we expand from there out towards helping others and like helping preserve the teaching, so to speak. And that's why the eighth step is specifically called, what was it was called? Was it called preserving the teaching, or was it simply creating your own teaching, or was it transmitting teaching, transmitting wisdom? But basically, you need to develop a kind of competence regarding how to keep this idea of truth and consciousness alive in the world, so that things don't go off the rails, or people start to become ignorant and dysfunctional again. And that is a whole struggle in itself. It's one struggle to try to like discover who you are, and in that sense improving yourself. I almost say improving yourself all the time, and I guess you can phrase it that way, but in some sense it's a kind of contradictory statement, because on the one hand we're not actually trying to improve ourselves because we don't know who we are. So talking about improving yourself is almost meaningless unless you know who you are and what you are dealing with and what you really want and what would be good for you. Like, we have to understand that we may not know what's good for us, and at the same time we should not fall under this kind of trap of falling for like these social expectations, that even though we may not know what we really want and what we really need, and it is legitimate to criticize people for thinking they know what they want, and this excessive search for freedom and desire for freedom isn't always the answer. But at the same time, we must also question everything around us that thinks they know what's best for us, even if we don't know what's best for us. And perhaps freedom is not something we can really handle, or perhaps we don't really understand all the difficulties that really comes with true freedom. At the same time, it's not like there is a reliable authority out there that can speak for us either. So the best way to find out how to improve, if there is such a thing, then we need to have a real debate about it and be honest and open and truthful about ourselves, and that requires authenticity. So that's I think that's all that needs to be said in a summary of the steps of development.